The right glue can make a paper craft look clean and polished, but the wrong one can warp your cardstock, leave cloudy marks, slide around when you're trying to line things up, or weaken over time. And the tricky part? You usually don't know if a glue was a problem until it's already on your project. Some of the most popular glues I tested completely failed certain tests too. Hello everyone, JenniferMaker here. It's a beautiful day to find out which craft glues really work best for paper crafts. I tested 13 popular craft glues side by side to compare the most important categories for paper crafting. Some glues were great for tiny paper cuts. Some were better for large surfaces. Some were incredibly strong but frustrating to use. And a few results really surprised me. So in this video, I'll show you how I tested each glue, how they ranked, and which ones I'd actually use for different paper crafting projects. Let's get started. First, gather the glues you want to test. None of these brands paid me to do this test, so these are my own observations and results. If you want to try this yourself, you can absolutely do a smaller version at home with the glues you already have. For my tests, I'm setting everything up with matching test sheets, so each glue can be compared the same way. Plus, I'm using materials I work with all the time in paper crafting, including cardstock, acetate, vellum, detailed cricut cuts, and rolled paper pieces under pressure. I'm testing how easy each glue is to control, how clean it looks after drying, how quickly it grabs, how well it handles pressure, and how it performs in different temperatures. I am also wearing safety glasses, gloves, and an apron, opening a window and turning on a fan so my work area is well ventilated, and protecting my work surface with parchment paper because some craft glues require extra caution. I'm also keeping a timer nearby for the adhesion and pressure tests. Now let's start testing. The first thing I want to test is how well each glue flows and how easy it is to control with its narrowest applicator. I'll start with my new Barely Art glue with the precision tip equipped and make 3 small lines and 3 dots to see how the glue behaves. Barely Art gives me clean, narrow lines and small dots without much effort. The 2-year-old bottle of Barely Art glue still controls surprisingly well, which honestly impressed me. Nuvo is also one of the easier liquid glues to control for detailed paper crafting. Art Glitter glue performs pretty well too. It is not quite as clean looking as Barely Art, but it is much easier to control than the thicker, runnier, or stringier glues I'll show. Tombow has 2 applicator tips, so for this test I'm using the narrow tip for this comparison. It works well, but not quite as clean as Barely Art or Nuvo. The Zig glue pens work more like paint pens. They give controlled placement, but I have to keep priming them as I work, which interrupts the flow a bit. The 4mm pen gives the most coverage. The 2mm pen feels like the best balance for small details. And the 1mm pen is the most precise, but also the most specialized. The thicker glues, like Aleene's Tacky Glue, Aleene's Clear Gel, and Scotch No Run Tacky Glue, stay in place but are harder to apply in tiny lines. And the problem glues become more obvious. Elmer's Clear Glue spreads. Mosaic glue is difficult to control. And Beacon 3-in-1 is stringy. I initially had Let's Bond in my tests, but decided to remove it after reading more about its safety requirements. It's a powerful super glue, so it has its place in crafting, but didn't fit the examples I want to show. You'll see it in a few shots, but I don't recommend it for general crafting. For glues without a narrow applicator, I have to improvise a little. Mod Podge naturally works better with a brush for broad coverage, but we lose a lot of precision that way. And the Avery Permanent Glue Stick is easy to control as long as I use a sharp edge, but it is clearly meant to cover more surface area at once. This first test already shows an important pattern. The easiest glue to use is not always the easiest glue to control. Next, I'm testing precision in a more realistic way by applying each glue to a small, detailed snowflake and placing it onto cardstock. This is where a glue that looks fine on a test sheet can suddenly become frustrating. Barely Art is one of the strongest standouts here because I can apply a small amount exactly where I need it without flooding the design. Nuvo also works well for clean paper layers. And the Zig pens are useful for tiny details because I can almost draw the glue directly onto the cardstock. The 2mm tip is probably the best balance for tiny details, while the 1mm tip is helpful only when I need an extra fine line. Art glitter glue also makes sense here if you are comfortable controlling the amount. The glues that struggle here are the ones that are too thick, too fluid, too stringy, or flow too fast, like Beacon, which can leave strings across the design. That kind of spread can be useful for the right project, but it becomes harder to control on tiny Cricut cuts. So if you're working on a project with lots of tiny cuts, the glues with better control are typically going to give you a better result. Next, I'm gluing cardstock, vellum, and acetate hearts to my second test page to examine each glue's appearance after drying. These materials make spreading, cloudiness, glue lines, and warping much easier to see. So this test helps reveal which glues stay clean looking and which ones become more visible on the finished project. Barely Art and Nuvo are two of the cleanest looking options, and Tombow also performs well here. Avery Permanent Glue Stick looks neat on flat paper, which is why glue sticks can be appealing for simple projects. But this test also shows that clear does not always mean invisible. Aleene's Clear Gel and Elmer's Clear Glue are both clear glues, but they can still spread more than expected, or leave visible outlines under vellum and acetate. Aleene's Tacky Glue can dry more visibly or milky if too much is applied, while Beacon 3-in-1 and Mosaic Glue look more like strength or specialty adhesives here, not invisible paper glues. Visible glue can completely change how polished a finished project looks, so if your project uses thin or see-through materials, definitely pay attention to the appearance after drying. The next test is initial adhesion, or how long a piece stays movable before the glue sets. To test this, I'm using photo paper, face-up glitter cardstock, and face-down glitter cardstock. I'll fold the corners to give myself a tab to hold on to, and then apply a similar amount of glue to each one. One at a time, I'll press a heart down and try to lift it from the test sheet until it's adhered, using my phone timer to track how long the heart stays movable. For glues where the original applicator doesn't give enough control, I'm using small test bottles to equalize the amount of glue I'm using for each test. Aleene's Tacky Glue and Avery Permanent Glue Stick grab quickly, but not instantly, which is helpful for simple pieces. Beacon also grabs quickly, but its stringiness can make placement harder on small details. Barely Art and Nuvo feel more balanced for detailed paper crafting because they give enough time to place the piece carefully without staying slippery for too long. That makes them easier to use when you need to line up a small cardstock layer or delicate cut. Elmer's Clear Glue is on the opposite end of the spectrum. It gives more adjustment time because the formula is slower to dry, but the piece can also slide around longer than you want. As you can see, faster is not always better. Initial adhesion is really about whether the glue gives you the right working time and control for your project. Now I'm testing how the glues react to constant pressure. I'm using rolled cardstock cone pieces in both 65-pound cardstock and glitter cardstock to simulate shapes you might use in 3D paper flowers. These pieces naturally want to spring open, so this is very different from gluing down a flat piece of paper because it puts a lot more stress on the glue seam. And this is where the rankings start to shift, because a glue that looked beautiful on flat paper suddenly struggles once the paper starts pushing back. The Avery glue stick is a good example. To test it, I am rolling the cardstock into a cone, applying glue to the seam, and holding the seam closed. I'm also timing how long it takes the cone to stay sealed on its own. We already know the glue stick is clean and simple for flat pieces, but here we find out it's much less suited to rolled cardstock. We can test the remaining glues the same way. Mod Podge, while useful for broad coverage and sealing, is not the strongest choice for tiny seams under pressure. Aleene's Tacky Glue benefits from its thicker consistency in the grab test, and the older Barely Art does surprisingly well in this category. This is also where some of the glues that didn't perform well in earlier tests show their strength. Beacon 3-in-1 holds very well under pressure despite its lack of precision. And Mosaic Glue performs better here than it does in the precision tests. I'll check the ones that are holding up now again at the 24 and 48 hour marks to see if they keep holding. This test helps separate good for flat paper from good for dimensional paper, which might be important depending on your project. Finished crafts are not always stored in perfect conditions, and temperature changes can affect how well glue holds over time. So for my last test, I'm gluing small hearts onto 3 separate test sheets using a variety of crafting papers. One card stays at room temperature, one goes into a colder area, and one goes into the warmest place in my home. Then I'll leave everything for 48 hours and see which hearts are still attached afterward. The biggest thing I'm watching for is whether a glue that performs fine at room temperature starts to fail when the temperature changes. Avery permanent glue stick looks neat on flat paper, but on the warm test card, the cardstock hearts come loose. This tells me I should avoid it for paper projects that may sit in heat. Barely Art, Nuvo, and Tombow are stronger here because the small pieces stay attached across the temperature cards. So these are reliable choices when a paper project may be stored in changing conditions like moving through the mail. The 2 Barely Art bottles are also interesting to compare. The older bottle still performs well overall, but the new bottle holds better in the temperature test. So I'd choose a fresh bottle for projects that need to be extra reliable over time. Beacon 3-in-1 also stays attached well in the temperature test, which fits what we've seen in the pressure tests. It holds firmly, but is harder to control on delicate paper pieces. Mod Podge ends up being a little more mixed. It struggled with larger glitter cardstock pieces in the earlier adhesion test, but in this smaller temperature test, the heart stays attached better. So with Mod Podge, the size of the piece and the surface texture seem to matter just as much as temperature. Mosaic glue and Scotch No Run tacky glue also hold better on the temperature cards than their precision and appearance results might suggest. Now that all the tests are finished, let's look at what the results actually mean for paper crafting. A few glues did exactly what I expected, but a few changed my mind once I compared all the test results. I'm not going to read every ranking one by one, but you can see the full chart over on the blog at JenniferMaker.com/854. Instead, I want to focus on the biggest takeaways. For detailed paper crafting, New Barely Art is the clear overall winner, while the 2-year-old bottle ranks second, which is impressive. It gives the best balance of precision, clean appearance, controlled application, and reliable performance. For layered cardstock, shadow boxes, delicate cricut cuts, rolled flowers, or any project where clean placement matters, Barely Art is the strongest choice from this test. Nuvo is another strong option, especially for flat paper layers, cards, and projects, where a clean, dried appearance is important. It does not grab quite as aggressively under pressure, but it performs well enough across several categories to stay near the top. Tombow is also a solid general paper glue, especially if you like having both a narrow tip and a broad applicator. It is not the cleanest precision glue in the test, but it performs well in appearance and temperature testing. For large surface coverage or sealing, Mod Podge is the best value, but it is not a precision glue. It makes more sense for decoupage, sealing, and broad coverage than tiny cardstock details. On the other end, Mosaic Glue and Elmer's Clear Glue are not the best choices for detailed paper crafting. Mosaic Glue is better suited to the specialty projects it is designed for, and Elmer's Clear Glue is better for school crafts or kids' projects than polished Cricut projects. The stronger adhesive, Beacon 3-in-1, is useful when strength matters, but it's harder to control and can be stringy, so it's not great for delicate paper projects. The biggest takeaway from my testing is that the best glue really depends on the project. So before you grab the closest bottle, think about what your project really needs. If your project has a specific challenge, the individual category results might matter more than the overall rank. Choose the glue that will help you accomplish your goals. And don't be surprised to find that the best craft glue for you might change as you explore new projects and techniques. One more thing to consider is cost per ounce, because the cheapest glue up front is not always the best value over time. A glue stick may cost less at checkout, but a larger bottle of liquid glue can be a better long-term value if you craft often. You can find my full ranking chart, testing notes, and links to the glues that I tested in the written tutorial over on my blog. Now, if you test your own favorite glues, I would love to hear what you discover. Share your findings in our Facebook group at JenniferMaker.com/cricketcrafters, or just tag me on social media with your results. Now, if you ever run into confusing Cricut issues while you craft, like tools not working quite right or materials not behaving the way you expect, my Cricut survival guide is full of quick fixes, helpful tips, and shortcuts to help you troubleshoot and get back to crafting faster. Learn more at cricketsurvivalguide.com. And that's it for today. Until next time, this is Jennifer Maker reminding you to craft a life you love.